understanding. We, thine unworthy servants, here gathered together in thy name, do most humbly beseech thee to send down thy heavenly wisdom from above, to direct and guide us in all our consultations, and grant that we, having thy fear always before our eyes, and laying aside all private interests, prejudices, and partial affections, the result of all our counsels may be to the glory of thy blessed name, the maintenance of true religion and justice, the safety, honor, and happiness of the Queen, the public weal, peace and tranquility of the island, and the uniting and knitting together of the hearts of all persons and estates within the same, in true Christian love and charity, one towards another, through Jesus Christ our Lord. Amen.
This meeting of the Honourable Senate of Jamaica on Friday, the 17th day of June in the year 2022 is called to order. Before we begin the business of the day, I've invited the Cuban ambassador to Jamaica, Excellency Fermin Quinoas Sanchez, to sit in the President's Gallery for reasons that will become apparent, and I ask you to welcome him this morning. I take it, Senator Samuda, that you wish to address me from a seat other than your own?
Yes, Mr. President, with your permission.
Thank you very much. Statements by ministers. So, Senator Samuda, by way of other matters, that you are acting as leader of government business today, I take it?
Yes, President. With
And
your
what
permission.
else do you have on the agenda today?
Today will be a short sitting. I will take 2 ministerial statements and table a bill.
Okay. And there is one particular statement that has the interest of our Cuban ambassador. Is that correct?
Correct, President.
And do you intend to do that one first or second?
I think we will do that one first, Mr. President, so that we don't have to detain His Excellency beyond that particular matter.
Thank you very much. And so say all of you. Thank you very much, Minister Samuda.
Mr. President, it is my honor to advise this morning that to advise the nation that the Cabinet of Jamaica has recently given its approval for Jamaica's membership to the Caribbean Biological Corridor Initiative. The CBCI, as I will refer to it, arose out of a 2007 political declaration from ministers of environment of Cuba, Haiti, and the Dominican Republic to partner in the long-term conservation of biodiversity based on the ecological connectivity within the Greater Antilles beyond political boundaries. Mr. President, it is in this vein and in this context that I am happy to welcome His Excellency, a friend of this Parliament and a friend of the nation, Ambassador of Cuba, to join us this morning, as this is an initiative that I know is dear to the hearts of the people of Cuba. I think it's also important to extend to the people and nation of the Dominican Republic our condolences for the loss of their Minister of Environment in a recent very tragic incident, His Excellency Minister Orlando Jorge Mera. I know he would have worked with my predecessor on this initiative, and we extend our condolences and well wishes to the people of Dominican Republic and to his family. The initiative...
Senator Minister, you wish the Senate perhaps to write to the government in relation to the expression of our joint condolences?
Yes, President, thank you for that. That would be the appropriate action, and I think would see support from both sides of the aisle.
So Madam Speaker, you could write to the ambassador and indicate our condolences on that.
Thank you, Mr. President. The initiative has been widely recognized as an important example of South-to-South cooperation. Indeed, Mr. President, the initiative aims to increase the ecological connectivity across the Greater Antilles. Preserving this connectivity among the island states of the Greater Antilles is important, as it will contribute to the sustainable management of ecosystems and the services they provide. For example, the provision of food, fuel and water, carbon storage and regulation of climate, erosion and flood control, heritage and culture, and nutrient and water cycling, which support key economic sectors within these countries, including health, agriculture, fisheries, and of course tourism. Mr. President, so that colleagues appreciate the importance of this membership for Jamaica, allow me to highlight that the CBCI's focus is on building a strong and sustained collective, institutionalized, and regional approach to facilitate the conservation, management, and governance of terrestrial and marine biodiversity in the Caribbean. Based on a coordinated and structured expansion to other countries and territories, the initiative intends to A, build and demonstrate significant positive linkages between conservation, connectivity, livelihoods and poverty reduction through selected field activities and a targeted communication program, and B, deliver a sustainable and integrated knowledge management system on biodiversity and biological connectivity, joint and harmonized policies and instruments adequate and compatible capacity among participating countries and institutions, as well as sustained cooperation mechanisms between countries and institutions at the scientific, technical, and civil society levels. In addition, Mr. President, implementation of the CBCI will assist in raising awareness of the importance of the healthy and productive ecosystems to the economic growth and development and social well-being of the member countries. The projects and programs implemented under the CBCI will be synergized with similar programs and stakeholders under other regional initiatives to ensure maximum benefit to the participating countries. I hope colleagues will bear with me as I further provide history and context as to why membership of the CBCI is indeed so important. Mr. President, it is with this financial and technical support, or rather it is with the financial and technical support of the European Union and the United Nations Environmental Programme, a project was developed to assist the coordination of activities among CBC initiative participating countries. Phase 1 of the project, entitled The Demarcation and Establishment of the CBC as a Framework for Biodiversity, Conservation, Environmental Rehabilitation, and Development of Livelihood Options in Haiti, the Dominican Republic, and Cuba, was implemented between 2010 and 2014. An official evaluation took place in 2015. The evaluation recommended, inter alia, the need for greater emphasis on connectivity, on the role of a biological corridor in achieving national and regional conservation and sustainable development objectives, the strengthening of the CBC initiative as a planning and decision-making framework at national and sub-regional levels, and a clear and stated contribution of the CBC initiative to global and regional commitments. In layman's terms, Mr. President, the reporting document recognizes a significant movement of biodiversity between our countries as we share the same water and we share the same air. Following the successful implementation of the first phase of the CBC initiative, the EU provided a further 300,000 with in-kind donations to Cuba and the Dominican Republic for a transition phase. This dealt with the strengthening of capacity of the Environment Ministerial, both of AMREP and of Cuba, in planning and development of actions for biological diversity conservation within the framework of the CBC initiative. An interim evaluation was conducted in 2016, which highlighted the positive effect that the CBC initiative had in strengthening cooperation and partnership between and among CBC participating countries. The CBC initiative recognized as a significant sub-regional cooperation platform for issues related to biodiversity conservation. The initiative has been particularly useful in the design and implementation of binational cooperation projects between the Dominican Republic and Haiti. It is useful to note, Mr. President, and this is particularly important, that Puerto Rico has also become an official member and would have become so in 2016. A second phase of the project was intended to have started its implementation in 2017 and run until 2020. However, that implementation was delayed. And unfortunately for that initiative, however, it does create the opportunity now for Jamaica to be a part of this, to catch up on the first phase and indeed join in on the second phase. Biodiversity conservation, as well as its sustainable use, are critical to the achievement of the targets under Vision 2030 and indeed the SDGs, particularly goals 13, climate action, 14, life below water, and 15, life on land. Indeed, the importance of biodiversity, colleagues, to a nation's economic growth and development, as well as social well-being, cannot be overemphasized. Goal 4 of Vision 2030 Jamaica's National Development Plan is that Jamaica has a healthy natural environment. National Outcome 13, one of 4 national outcomes under this goal, focuses on sustainable management and use of environmental and natural resources. There are several strategies and actions listed under National Outcome 13, including the development and implementation of mechanisms for biodiversity, conservation, and ecosystems management. Mr. President and colleagues, we should all be aware that Jamaica has an extensive policy and legal framework for the management of biodiversity. In recent times, several biodiversity-related policies and plans have been finalized and are being completed in some cases, while others are being implemented. These include the Protected Area Systems Master Plan for Jamaica, 2013 to 2017, the Forest Policy of Jamaica, completed in 2017, the Biosafety Policy for Jamaica, completed in 2021, the Climate Change Policy Framework, completed in 2015, is now being updated, and we're going through the consultation process nationally. The National Biodiversity Strategy and Action Plan in Jamaica, which lasted from 2016 to 2021, is also now being updated to ensure that we're compatible with all of our international obligations. Mr. President, there are a number of related policies which the ministry is working to update or to complete. These impact biodiversity and ecological health significantly. This is the Beach Access and Management Policy, the Watersheds Policy, overarching policy for Jamaica's Protected Area System, which is an update of the 1997 policy, the National Fisheries and Aquaculture Policy, and indeed the Keys Management Draft. The Keys Management Policy, a first in its kind for Jamaica. With respect to the legislative framework, and colleagues will agree, these acts have been overdue for a long time, but they will receive amendment this year. We intend to close this out this financial year. The NRCA Act, the Watershed Protection Act, the Wildlife Protection Act, and indeed the Forest Act. Mr. President, the Ministry of Economic Growth and Job Creation will commence work in earnest next financial year on the promulgation of omnibus protected areas legislation as announced by the Prime Minister in his recent budget presentation. That requires that the other pieces of legislation are up to date, which is why we'll have to sequence it in that way. Colleagues, it should be noted that the parties to the Convention on Biological Diversity, including Jamaica, are currently in the process of negotiating a post-2020 global biodiversity framework, including new global targets, which will replace previous global biodiversity targets, commonly referred to as the ACHI biodiversity targets. Hence, there will be need for parties to update their targets to reflect the GBF once finalized. Mr. President, in recognition of the value of the ecosystem services to human well-being, Jamaica has declared several marine and terrestrial protected areas. Most recently, Cabinet approved the declaration of the Black River and indeed the Cockpit Country as protected areas under the Natural Resource Conservation Authority Act. To date, we're at approximately 25% of land and 12% of the country's terrestrial and marine areas are legally declared as protected areas. More to come, Mr. President. Mr. President, that is a small part of what Jamaica is doing to protect its biodiversity. The CBC initiative will develop and promote a new holistic, integrated, cross-sectoral approach to preserve remaining natural refuges, and restore ecological connectivity from ridge to reef at landscape and seascape scales. Actions will be regionally coordinated, which is particularly important, and will build upon existing joint efforts of the CBC countries around their strategic plans for biodiversity and climate change. Mr. President, more effective climate-smart livelihoods will be promoted under this initiative while reducing climate vulnerabilities and helping to prevent future pandemics that may result from human-wildlife interaction. This is an innovative conservation program. Its transformative character resides in its focus on identifying, reducing, and existing pressures on biodiversity. We should have joined a long time ago, Mr. President. There are multiple benefits to Jamaica joining the CBCI. As a member of the initiative, Jamaica is expected to benefit through the management efforts geared at A, a wide range of migratory species, species or groups of species with high potential for dispersal of genetic material, C, ecosystems and habitats within key sites to aid regional connectivity, D, species representative in the insular or of the insular Caribbean, where distribution areas are shared by the CBC member countries, E, ecosystem representatives of the shared and threatened ecoregions of the Greater Antilles, F, other species or groups of endemic or migratory species that are highly sensitive or vulnerable to climate change, and G, ecosystems representative of the threatened ecoregions of the Caribbean, which are highly sensitive or vulnerable to climate change, and are key to regional conservation, for example, coral reefs, terrestrial and marine forests, and sea turtle nesting beaches. Jamaica's membership to the CBC initiative will also complement the work currently being undertaken to support other global and regional initiatives to which Jamaica is a member, including the Caribbean Biodiversity Fund, the Caribbean Challenge Initiative, the Leaders Pledge for Nature, the High Ambition Coalition for Nature and People, and the Global Ocean Alliance. Mr. President, Jamaica's membership to the Caribbean Biological Corridor is a good thing. It is late, but a good thing nonetheless. I thank you.
Thank you, Minister. As is our custom, I think Senator Fraser-Binns will say something.
Thank you, Mr. President. I'll be short. No, I don't want to use brief because it has a different meaning when you juxtapose that with Senator Webby from last time we sat. So I'm going to use the word short because I think that's what he used. Mr. President, thank you so very much. And Mr. President, I want to join with my friend and colleague, Minister Samuda, in also extending welcome to His Excellency in joining us here today. And I also join with Minister in extending condolence to former Minister George Miro on his passing. Mr. President, I want to start off by really thanking Minister Samuda for this announcement here today. The fact is that it is an announcement, and he ended by saying it is late, but a good time, good thing nonetheless. And I think we perhaps were exchanging notes because I have in my notation here that it is an announcement whose time has come and could not come any sooner. And with that, Mr. President, we in the opposition really want to signal how happy we are with this announcement and certainly our full support for the people and the government of Jamaica in this initiative. And certainly, as he knows, we are ready to participate and give our views and our resources, mainly human resources, of course, to ensure that the objectives are achieved. And this is particularly important because, as the Minister said, Jamaica was not a signatory to this initiative when it started in 2007. And we now have decided to become a member. And it is particularly important because you do recall that the decade 2021 to 2030 is seen as the United Nations General Assembly decade for ecosystem restoration and for the sustainable development of our oceans. And it is in that light why I think that this announcement is very important and is most welcome. I wonder though, Minister, and I'm not going to put you too much on the spot, but I went through your statement, and there are a few things, again, I believe we were exchanging notes, because there are a few things you mentioned which I have here that I just want to raise with you for consideration. I'm not sure if you can give an update, but certainly for consideration. And I want to start with something that you have highlighted as one of your targets for the next year, and it has to do with the amendment to the Forest Act. And we all know that it is in need of great amendment. And I want to add that when that amendment is taking place, or when the consideration has commenced, that we look at this PAW protocol and see how we can merge. How I don't think Jamaica has yet ratified this PAW protocol, so it will be a good time for us to ratify it, and certainly how we can incorporate some of the best practices in the amendment to the Forest Act. And along the same line, I can't help but to mention the amendments to the NRCA Act, because there's a motion, Minister, and I'm looking at you because I know this is not your decision, but I'm still looking at you and hoping that given the passion you share, some, intervention can be made. There's a motion that has been tabled that was tabled last year on the amendment for the NRCA Act. And I do hope that in keeping with the discussion today and the projected programs that are slated to be undertaken, that we really look at having that discussion on the NRC Act. And I say that, Mr. President, because you see, it is one thing to have the amendments in a nice office in, where's the office now? New Kingston. But it is also another thing to get the country involved in such an important piece of legislation which impacts every aspect of people's lives. And especially at a time when there's so many outcry about how we treat with environmental violations and the developments that are taking place, Your Worship, and how we manage all of that, and how through the NRCA Act we can have the best piece of legislation for the protection of the environment. And I say that because notwithstanding the number of legislation we have, the NRCA Act really represents the prime piece of legislation for the protection of the environment. And I believe that given the seminal role it plays, it should be something that is arrived at through wide-based consultation. And I know, Minister, that consultation is your modus operandi. And I really look forward not just to the debate in this Senate, but certainly through the Joint Select Committee, where we can have the views of every Jamaican who wants to participate, and we can have the best piece of legislation. The other thing I want to just bring to your fore, Minister, and it is this, I know it's a personal passion of yours, and so I shan't belabor it, but when I was reading about the Caribbean Biological Corridor, I couldn't help but think about it, and I couldn't help but recall how passionate you are about it, and it has to do with parrot fishing. And I wondered whether the government has yet come up with a plan, a policy as to how we're going to treat with parrotfish, and if not, whether this is something that is being contemplated for the short term. And I raise that because we all know the nexus between parrotfish and our coral reefs and how it impacts on livelihood, particularly of coastal communities. And I think that Jamaicans love, I know that Jamaicans love the parrotfish, but we also know that they are endangered, and we also know that more has to be done to ensure we manage the harvesting of our parrotfish. And I wish to know, Minister, whether the government has yet developed a policy or is in the process of developing such a policy. The other thing, and I know this is still very new, so it is not a question for answer, but it's just a recommendation for contemplation as we operationalize our membership with the CBCI. And one of the objectives, as I understand, is to achieve sustainable socio-ecological relationship between communities of resource users and the ecosystems that provide them. And given this, I thought to myself that there is a clear understanding that the community, that people have to be at the center of this initiative. And following on the point I raised earlier about part fishing, the fishing community comes to mind. And I would love to know, well, I will not put it in terms of a question, I'll put it in terms of a statement and a recommendation, that as we operationalize this initiative and the different projects thereto, that due consideration and consultation is held, particularly with the fishing community, who will be impacted on, by some of these projects that are going to be undertaken, with the coastal communities who will also be impacted, so that, you know, they don't just hear that a particular decision has been made without being consulted. The truth is, and I've said it over and over, those of us who sit in our nice offices, including myself, who sit in a nice office, sometimes we don't fully understand the reality on the ground, and we make decisions that we think would be for the best, or would be in the best interest of persons, or we think that people want to know. And whereas our intent is commendable, the fact is that, again, from my days of social work, we're making a decision for people and they want something else. In this case, I don't think there's any debate about the need to protect the environment, but it's how we're going to go about doing it. And I think making a decision, particularly about our fishing communities and our coastal communities, will of necessity require us to meet with these communities, to meet with these sectors, have a discussion, to hear from them, and allow them to help us to frame the best decisions and the best policies which will impact on them. And just two more questions, Minister. The coral reefs, which I will not go into any great detail, but I couldn't help but to mention it in a time when we start the hurricane season, and appreciate the importance of our coral reefs. And, you know, I was reading somewhere, and it says that the Caribbean is considered the high diversity heart of the tropical West Atlantic. And it went on to say that without coral reefs, 25% of all marine lives would die. And there is no doubt that within the Caribbean, we have not done a good job of protecting our coral reefs, which is also one of the reasons why I'm very happy with our membership to the CBCI. But outside of that, Minister, I wondered whether the government has developed or is in the process of developing a short, medium, or long-term framework as to how we are going to rehabilitate our coral reefs and make them healthy and maintain them accordingly. And finally, the issue of the CBCI, though it looks at both marine, well, it looks at marine life, but it also looks at terrestrial. But for this question, I want to look at marine lives. And, you know, it's one thing for us to develop a framework or to have a plan, and I commend it. But one of the things that I have always wondered is, are we aware of what exactly exists out there? And if we're not fully aware of what exists, you know, what is the population of parrotfish? What is the population of our coral reefs? What's the population of our different types of marine lives? And unless or until we know that, then any attempt to truly develop a framework is going to be, in my mind, less than reliable. And to that extent, Minister, I do know that there will be opportunities for funding now that we are a member of the CBCI. I am recommending that we seriously look at undertaking what I call a marine spatial plan. And this is something that I had spoken about, certainly in my State of the Nation last year, but I'm again putting it at the fore because I think, given our membership and the new energy that it will bring, that we are now particularly in a very good position to undertake that marine spatial plan to just help us to know in a very forensic and scientific way exactly what exists in our marine environment, and through that will help us develop the best policies and legislation to protect and to maintain a healthy marine environment. And this is important, Minister and President and colleagues, because as I said earlier, well, I don't think I said it, but it was on my notes, but I will say it now in closing, that the world has gotten smaller and smaller, and certainly the Caribbean. There isn't any real, you know, in international law we learn about Jamaican airspace or Jamaican territorial water. You hear about Cuban water, we hear about Dumeric water. But in real life, it is so very difficult for us to differentiate, because you get into a boat, and before you know it, or a ship, before you know, you're out of Jamaican waters into Cuban waters, but nobody can't really tell you. I mean, the average person can't tell you at what point you cross over from Jamaican water to Cuban territorial water. And it is because of the interconnection that exists that I believe that such a thing that we have done today in terms of membership is important. And I want to close by saying, again, the opposition commends the government, and we stand in full support to give any assistance we can to this initiative, if it pleases you, sir.
Mr. President, would it
Thank
be
you, Senator Fraser-Binns. I can't help but notice that when environmentalists speak, there is a certain camaraderie, a sort of green relationship between you all. Blue. In this regard, it's the blue economy. That's right. Minister?
Thank you, Mr. President. Would it be useful to me to take the questions posed now, or if there are any others, take all at the same?
Can't be any more.
Oh.
Go ahead. Oh, sorry. Go ahead. Yeah, go ahead.
Sure. Thank you, Mr. President, and thank you, Minister. You know, as a Montegonian, I tend to start most of my statements by saying that. But in this sense, it's very easy to make that connection as a coastal town. And even though I speak on this side for tourism, my interest and support for this initiative and Jamaica's participation in this corridor, even though I speak on behalf of tourism, it's more so, for me, it's more an importance for Jamaicans and for Jamaica as we seek to preserve our environment or natural environment, that once we get that going well, we then have no problems. Tourism will benefit from that. As the Minister said, we have no shortage of policies and frameworks and everything that could support these efforts. It is now up to us and what is the result of this partnership that will allow us, should encourage us even more so now today than ever before, to ensure that we make good and take advantage of this partnership within this region. There's much to gain, so much to gain, not just for tourism and all the other sectors that benefit from tourism, but as Jamaicans. The work that you are undertaking in here, and which is supported by us on this side, is commendable, and we see it as an opportunity for greater collaboration within the region. The environment, as Senator Fraser-Binns just mentioned, it's very hard to say where is what and where what stops and what starts. So this cooperation with the other countries in the Caribbean, which we hope will extend even further, should redound to greater benefit for each of us individually, each country individually, but collectively, certainly a benefit to us all. I therefore join and trust that as they roll out of this and this partnership is operationalized, that all the sectors that are likely to be impacted, particularly tourism, will be included in those discussions to ensure that we have even greater take-up of what needs to be done. We are ready to do our part and look forward to the benefits that will accrue to Jamaicans and those who visit Jamaica. So I just wanted to add those few words of support, Mr. President, and thank the Minister and look forward to this becoming into reality. Thank you.
Thank you, Senator Allen. Minister? Unless any of your colleagues have anything they want to ask.
It doesn't seem so, President. But I suspect the other statement may trigger more discussion. Firstly, President, allow me to thank colleagues who were whispering support behind me and those who have stated their support from the opposition. This is an important initiative, as I mentioned, and it's not a term we use as often as we probably should in this chamber, but this is an important example of South-to-South cooperation. It's an important initiative showing how we can integrate and work together with our neighbors, our brothers and sisters. And I thank His Excellency for joining us this morning. And I think it's important that the records show that. My colleague and friend mentioned the UN Decade for Restoration of Ecosystems and for Protection of the Ocean. It is not something that should be on a banner or just discussed thematically. It is absolutely critical for Jamaica's future, its prosperity, its progress, whichever term suits you best. It is absolutely critical that we acknowledge that this is going to be the base of our survival. Jamaica, through the branding and packaging that has come from an industry that Senator Allen, I know, cares about deeply, the tourism industry, from 60 years of good work right across the space, has largely packaged an image of sun, sand, and sea with a beautiful people. If we're not careful, we will certainly lose the sand and the sea if we don't manage ourselves properly, and in losing the sand and the sea, we will initially impact our people negatively, but could impact our people permanently, and that is the broader concern. I'll address the specific points raised from colleagues, President. The legislative focus is absolutely critical. If we're to be honest and we look across administrations, the crisis of the day tends to get the focus of the day from the legislative capacity that we have. So if we look at the number of finance bills, for instance, that would have been passed between 2012 and 2015, significant, nothing to scoff at, good work. You look at national security bills, you look at other finance bills during this particular period, good amount, some sizable, things like NIDS that took a lot of legislative time. So the environment hasn't gotten its due in terms of the focus of the legislative capacity of government. From the administrative level, from the executive level, it just hasn't gotten its focus, its due, since independence. And there's a lot of work to do, and there are a lot of regulations, a lot of policy documents to update, and that is not something that we should be proud of. It's my hope that a part of my time my hope and promise that a part of my time will be bringing the ones that are most critical to the fore, that hopefully triggers a domino effect in getting the others up to date. The SPA protocol mentioned by Senator Fraser-Binns, just to note, Senator Binns, it's actually, the bigger issue we have with ratifying it is actually the Wildlife Protection Act, which should be ready pretty soon. The Forest Act, they do have something, but the bigger issue that would affect the ratification is the Wildlife Protection Act, which we'll bring very soon. So, as the PM had said in his budget speech, we will do it this calendar year. So the SPA protocol, which has been languishing and we should have ratified a long time ago, will be complete this year. But the action and the operating plans and the implementation, there is some work that is taking place with the GEF, etc., that will not just allow us to ratify and feel quite proud, which is our job in this chamber, but will ensure that the teams that actually implement some of the solutions will have the funding necessary to make that a reality. The NRCA Act, and I've been looking at it very carefully with colleagues regionally just to see what was best practice elsewhere. I've been looking at what the state of the regulations are. And I've looked at, Senator Fraser-Binns, your motion several times. The EIA regs, as I understand it, and I don't speak legalese and I say so all the time, doesn't, unfortunately, need to come here. It can be gazetted with the power of the board. Now, that's not the best way for that piece, those regulations to go and start to govern the country. There is going to be a process of significant consultation, and the opposition will be invited to the table, as you know that I do, to comment and to work with us on getting that right, because I think that is critical. I think as we look at the NRCA Act, I think that may need to change in the Act going forward. So we'll discuss that. How we deal with the motion, we're very far down the wicket in terms of being able to invite it to consultation. So I think after that first round of consultations, you can see whether or not the motion is best placed or another way to discuss the issue and bring the issue to public discussion. Because we are nearing completion on a number of these that will come as a suite of legislation. So I think, look at where we are when I invite you soon, and your team that came and visited us last time can go through it, take a couple of weeks, tell us, where you think we are, and then we look at that in terms of the way forward so that it has the support, the national support that is required. There will be, and we'll even, how we would have approached the working group on plastics. So we've done a comprehensive list that I'll write to you about in terms of the groups that we believe should be a part of the consultation. Nothing that is legally required, but just to ensure that it has a broad-based backing, so that when it goes forward, the country can get behind it and we can pull some of the unnecessary arguments that we're having in communities right across the length and breadth of the country as we develop, because it is this government's intention to see us develop at a rate that we haven't in our 60 years, but we need to do so in an orderly, sensible manner. The parrotfish discussion I will dive into a lot more, admittedly, during my State of the Nation. Now, the parrotfish discussion is one that shows the competing priorities in developing countries of economic survival, sometimes not growth, just survival, versus environmental protection. I've had the benefit of a study that was done for Jamaica, shared with me, done by Honourable Salah, who is the Executive Director of Pristine Seas, Chief Marine Biologist for National Geographic, who has looked at the conservation priorities that Jamaica should pursue. He looked at it in 3 categories: one for biodiversity protection, one for carbon sequestration, and one for food production, because he looked at it also from the basis of how do you grow your economy sustainably, how do you build a blue economy. And the areas, several of the areas intersect, some don't, but, and we will have to have the conversations in terms of what we can secure and what we can't, and the process that goes into that. But his theory, and one that we will explore formally, is that we could move from between 15 to 25,000 metric tons in terms of what we extract now. By protecting these areas, we could replenish our stocks that could allow us over a period of years to get to 200,000 metric tons sustainably. So environmental protection will lead to economic growth. And I think that is a concept that we need to get across to our people. But it does mean, like everything else, you have to save some money. Sometimes when you're saving money, you have to cut out how you're spending, and in saving that money, you invest it, and then you wait for that return. That is what the discussion of environmental protection really is about. Community engagement is going to be critical. The nature of the fishing, you couldn't dream of making any of these sorts of changes without engaging them and getting their buy-in. And the truth is, where there's going to be short-term dislocation for any of these policies that you put into place, the government, using some of the mechanisms that we'd have used to help displaced workers during COVID, will have to look at helping the fisherfolk who could be displaced in short periods of time. But not in a handout sort of way, but in repurposing their work during that space. Because at the end of the day, we have an EEZ 24 times our landmass. We're not short of ocean-based jobs, we just haven't harnessed them. So they know the seas better than any of us in here. So let us harness that knowledge in a way that allows them to feed their families while we consult and build that space. The reefs in the region, colleagues, are not in a good state. I have the benefit of diving occasionally. I have the benefit of colleagues in the NGO community and in the ministerial community. Jamaica, I'd encourage people to look back at the last 2 State of the Environment reports. I think it's done every 4 to 5 years, which should be due one soon. The reefs are deteriorating. Climate change is affecting them. Our poor management of sewage is affecting them. Solid waste is affecting them. And overfishing is affecting them. it's a perfect storm that could see us losing our reefs. So with a perfect storm, we're going to have to dismantle that storm by looking at all these elements. And I intend to take that on again in my State of the Nation. But an area that, I know Senator Bunting would know very well from his time at the National Water Commission, the investment that's going to be required in our deeply urbanized areas to deal with the sewage issue is not just an investment in tearing up roads and pipes and groundwater. It's as much an investment in your near-shore environment, and we're going to have to make it. And again, under the section of my water presentation, I'll address quite a bit of that in the coming months. The sea population, and this is where the conversation is going to have to start with those who are thought leaders in the country. And we're going to have to ask every thought leader from every side of the political divide, every part of the religious community, every part of community leadership to explain. 50, 60 years ago, you had 9 species of fish easily, readily available within our waters. We have 5. We have 5 now. So we can eat the parrotfish till there's no more left and we go down to 4, and we keep going down, or we can get ourselves in order and get back up to 7 or 8 with a particular frequency, size, and thing that won't just feed your families, but will feed everybody else's families. So that's going to be an important conversation. This CCBI mechanism, President, will give us access to the expertise, and not just the expertise scientifically, the expertise in terms of how it has been implemented in countries with similar development challenges. And that is particularly important to see what worked. Note the cultural changes, and I mean, we're all politicians, so we know how to interact within our communities, but that will be a critical part of seeing the true benefit from this. The call, Senator Binns, is one I don't know if you recall, I would have applauded at the time. The call for a full marine spatial plan. Jamaica has actually signed on to such a call in its commitment letters to the high-level panel for a sustainable ocean economy. And Jamaica is actively scoping this project to go and get multilateral funding for it. Now, these sorts of projects, you have to put some skin in the game, so it is a way out from when I can say we will start by X date, but it is very much on our radar and something that we're working at. It is going to be critical for Jamaica to truly realize its blue potential. The country doesn't have to wait on the government to sign great agreements like the CBCI. The country can take action, and citizens can do so with their choice of consumption. They can do so with their choice of disposal. Corporate citizens like Grace Kennedy have shown the way, to be fair. The impact of the work that Grace Kennedy is doing in the Kingston Harbour with the Ocean Cleanup Project, which is an NGO which we also need to formally, it's the name of the project, but also the name of the group that's helping. So I want to make sure that we acknowledge all the players in there. And I think, President, with your leave, we'd like to also extend a letter to the players of that project, saying that they were acknowledged in the Senate, if you will grant such permission. They have put barricades of sorts, so that's not the technical name, that block the flow of solid waste into the Kingston Harbour. While I was in St. James this week, looking with Minister Bartlett, there are 2 critical gullies that we're also going to be extending to in St. James very soon, with a similar sort of arrangement, private sector funding, government support in terms of the technical aspect, and some external support in terms of the system that we use from another global NGO. So we accept that you have to stop the flow while doing the regenerative work in the sea. And this is a critical element because, there's so many people doing very good work. It's just that it's being done at a small scale and not necessarily being coordinated.
Senator
So I wouldn't come off of this topic.
I noticed you had mentioned Grace. I noticed that Sandals has linked with somebody for the... So
Sandals Foundation has been doing excellent work in the ocean space, and also in a very interesting project, Alligator Head Foundation, who is funded similarly from I think, Sandals and others. They have found a way to generate coral regrowth in a lab, and their transplant initiatives have had very high success rates in terms of stirring coral replanting. So we want to acknowledge the work of the Alligator Head Foundation as well. Mr. President, I heard Mr. Bartlett say it on Wednesday at a forum in St. James. It's your people plus your place, right? and we have the best people, but we're not taking care of our place as though it is the best. So we collectively have a lot of work to do. This framework that we have joined, this corridor that we have joined with our brothers and sisters in the region is an important step. We now have to actualize the intent of that step, and it will take all of our work. I thank you, Mr. President.
Thank you very much, Minister Samuda, and I must say that we certainly recognize the enthusiastic, personal enthusiasm and the enthusiastic and competent approach that you have taken to dealing with the matters that fall under your ministry. May I suggest, sir, an excellent advertising campaign that could read, "Eat the lion, not the parrot"?
Noted, President. Second, should I approach a second statement?
1 minute.
Sure.
Excellency, I want to thank you very much for coming to spend the morning with us, and I trust that you would indicate to your government that we are indeed happy to be joint participants with you in this project and declaration. Thank you very much for coming to spend the morning with us. Thank you. Minister Samuda, you have something else to...
Yes, President. One other ministerial statement. I'll ask for it to be shared with colleagues. So, President, there has been recent concern expressed in the media, in some of the call-in programs, I think in both newspapers and indeed on at least one TV station, in terms of breaches of something that this chamber should know very well because it started here, and that is the plastic ban. So I thought it important just to update colleagues on where we are, what we're doing now and what is to come, especially because it started in this chamber and benefited significantly from the support of both sides. Mr. President, as a matter of course, I feel an introduction to the issue necessary. I'm reminding colleagues that this process started when the Senate debated and passed a motion which I had tabled in 2016. That motion called for the ban of some single-use plastic packaging materials and the establishment of a working group to guide that process. Mr. President, as an important side note, and perhaps you recall, all opposition senators then voted in support of the motion. There was, however, one exception. The then leader of opposition business in the Senate and current leader of the opposition, Mark Golding, who abstained. The cabinet of the day acted on the motion passed in the Senate and established a multi-stakeholder working group to examine the issue and make recommendations for the implementation of the proposed ban. The working group's composition created great benefit. Mr. President, it included the affected private sector groups and the parliamentary opposition, among several other critical groups. It was chaired by Dr. Paris Leawai, and we thank him for his work. The scope of work led to the formation of two subcommittees. One that would look at the environmental impact, and one that would look at the economic implications of such a move. To note, the impact of the international trade arrangements were also considered, and guidance was sought from the Ministry of Foreign Affairs and Foreign Trade and the Attorney General's chambers. Mr. President, subsequent to the completion of the report from the working group, the Cabinet instructed that further consultations be carried out before they could make final decisions. That process ended with consensus from the Partnership Council with the proposed steps for implementation of the ban of single-use plastic packaging materials being single-use plastic bags with dimensions 24 by 24 inches above thickness of 2.5 mils, single-use drinking straws, plastic drinking straws rather, and expanded polystyrene containers used to serve food. Expanded polystyrene is the actual name of the product. Styrofoam is an actual brand that sometimes we use interchangeably as things progress. This process, Mr. President, lasted about 2 years, with the passing of the motion in the Senate to the then Minister of Environment, Minister Vaz, announcing the government's policy position and subsequent implementation dates. The ban was eventually implemented on a phased basis, commencing on January 1st, 2019. The ban prohibits the manufacture, importation, or distribution of the items mentioned above. In essence, it focused more on the point of origin than the consumer, the final consumer, as there would naturally be less points of distribution than actual users of the product. The legal construct, Mr. President. The legislative approach created an iterative implementation schedule. Gazetted ministerial orders were drafted under both the Trade Act and the NRCA Act. This created market prohibition, which legally prevails today. This allowed for implementation within weeks after final policy decision and announcement. An example of efficiency, unfortunately, not common in our jurisdiction. Mr. President, to assess the success of this policy and indeed its implementation, one first has to ask, what was the intention of the ban? Quite simply, Mr. President and colleagues, the intention was to remove an estimated 24,000 tons of non-recyclable, non-biodegradable, carcinogenic waste from our waste stream. Colleagues, though we continue to study the impact, anecdotally we can say this has been achieved. Mr. President, that position has been informed by both JET's reports from International Coastal Cleanup Day, which analyzes waste found on the coastline, and by preliminary reports coming from the nation's landfills. This by no means indicates that implementation has been perfect or ignores recent challenges, especially over the last 6 months related to enforcement. Mr. President, the ban is, however, an important market signal that the government of Jamaica is reviewing its waste stream and will take regulatory action to remove items deemed deleterious to the environment from said waste stream when necessary. Furthermore, any analysis of the ban must consider 3 things: the process leading to the announcement, the legal construct, and indeed the implementation and market acceptance by category of material. Mr. President, earlier in my statement I outlined the process leading up to announcement and the legal construct. Perhaps worthy of discussion is the process of implementation and the market acceptance. As mentioned previously, the implementation has not been perfect. However, nothing is. Any objective statistical analysis of the more than 16,000 points of sale in Jamaica will show compliance rates above 90%. Mr. President, we should never seek to make good the enemy of the great. The implementation has also exposed policy and legislative gaps which the government will address in due course. A fact often forgotten and not reported is that based on consultations, the DBJ was instructed to establish a special window to assist the efforts of manufacturers in retooling to mitigate any economic fallout. To the best of my knowledge, as at this morning, none engaged despite the availability of financing. This process represented a depth of thought and a width of engagement not seen in other jurisdictions and not even within our own jurisdiction with other policy changes of this nature. In many ways, it represents a best practice for such a significant policy change. Mr. President, any discussion re-implementation also has to consider both enforcement activities and indeed public education. Mr. President, I wish to put on record that I believe the men and women who are employed with the Customs Agency, the NRCA, the NCRA, and indeed NEPA are hardworking Jamaicans who mean this country well, and I wish to acknowledge their service. Having had personal experience with all 3 entities, the institutional capacity sometimes simply does not match the nation's needs. The national budget simply cannot provide what is required for the upsizing of the capacity of these entities in the time frame we would like. However, one can look at an analysis of a ROI of sorts based on the agency's collective capacity. Mr. President, I wish to bring to your attention the work of NEPA in this pursuit. 42 businesses and individuals have been prosecuted for breaches under the NRCA Act, Plastic Packaging Materials Prohibition Order 2018, which occurred between the period of June 19th and February 2020. There has been significantly more. That data is being collated and will be brought at a later stage. 10 matters are also currently, today, this morning, awaiting a decision from the courts that will add to these numbers and continue to show enforcement. This clearly shows, Mr. President, it's not a free-for-all, and consequences will flow from those who flout the intent of the laws. A point I was making to Senator Bunting earlier, we've also received some legal guidance and some training from those who are better suited for matters of the courts and matters of prosecution in recent times as to how better to operationalize the use of the Trade Act, because the fines are significantly higher under the Trade Act. So we believe it will be a greater deterrent if these prosecutions are made under the Trade Act until we complete the amendments of the NRCA Act. Mr. President, one should also note that the legislative construct, and I mentioned this earlier, primarily targets commercial breaches as opposed to personal breaches. To my mind, this is an effort worthy of commendation and one that central government will have to resource appropriately. Mr. President, significant public education was undertaken, certainly in 2018-2019, in the first phase of the ban. But as with all things, and certainly due to budgetary constraints, we have turned our focus elsewhere. The government will have to immediately re-engage the public to remind persons of the ban and ensure the gains we have made are not eroded. Colleagues can look out for significant public engagement in the near future. I think it's important to note the impact of COVID on the issue of solid waste. Mr. President, I wish to put on record the concerns the government of Jamaica has in relation to the increase in particular categories of waste because of the measures to reduce the spread of COVID. We continue to evaluate the general increase in particular categories of plastic waste because of the necessary uses of masks, gloves, and other medical waste. And I'm not suggesting that we stop using things in line with best practice and in line with the advice of medical practitioners, just acknowledging that there has been a significant increase in the use of rubber, which is a type of plastic, and indeed other types of plastic related to the COVID pandemic. So some of the gains we would have seen from cutting three categories rather, of plastic, we will have to evaluate over time when the numbers become available. We acknowledge that that is something outside of our control. But next steps, Mr. President, because whereas we've done very well, certainly room for some improvement, but we've done very well, I think it's important to always share with the nation and bring colleagues into our confidence in terms of what we're thinking and how close we are to implementation of other steps. Mr. President, I remind colleagues, because this is important, that the target of this ban looked at plastic packaging which satisfied the following classification of being non-recyclable, non-biodegradable, carcinogenic waste. But the government isn't going to ignore the elephant in the room. Plastic bottles are a massive problem. And every time you have the discussion around plastic packaging material, Mr. President, it comes up, and rightfully so. And bottles are a problem whether they are entering your waste stream properly or improperly. They are, however, recyclable. And to the best of my knowledge, I've found no published document from reputable sources that the way we tend to use plastic bottles do not create release of carcinogens. If I'm to be corrected, someone can point me in that direction. None of my research, none of my consultations have shown that. That is different from expanded polystyrene foam, as was declared to be carcinogenic in the UNEP's report on plastics in 2018. There's been no such declaration that I've seen anywhere that would say that. So it's a different material. So in essence, the point I want colleagues to understand is that plastics, in many cases, are a good thing. But all plastics aren't created equally, and each one has different uses and has different consequences of use. So we have to look at them for what they are in each case. Mr. President, so what is the solution for bottles? You can't continue as is, but what is the solution? Plastic bottles represent approximately 13% of the Jamaican waste stream. Hence, the concern is warranted, and perhaps they require a separate focus in other statements, in other presentations, other than the items targeted by the ban. Beyond that, Mr. President, in the current unstable geopolitical environment, glass bottles, which you constantly have thrown at you, and Dan knows this, the glass bottles are simply not available in the quantities required by our market. Several of our manufacturers who use glass, who have long-term buying relationships, are struggling to keep pace with current demand, let alone to discuss glass in other ways. That means, quite frankly, colleagues, at this stage, plastic bottles aren't bannable. They're just not. Like it, hate it, they're not bannable while satisfying your market economic needs. So what do we do about them? Because we're not throwing up our hands and giving up. They do, however, require and deserve a significant focus from this government, and they will get it. This focus must come in the form of a legitimate deposit refund scheme backed by legislation. I wish to put on record that this statement in no way diminishes the efforts of the plastic manufacturers by way of the Jamaica Recycling Partners Initiative, or that of any of the other recycling companies currently operating in Jamaica. Their efforts are to be acknowledged and congratulated. However, the results of that noble effort are not in line with our national ambition. My information is that less than 20% of newly produced bottles are collected for recycling. I would love to be incorrect. So if anybody has other data, I would be happy to be corrected. But that's my information. The USA, however, nationally is only at about 9%. So our ambition, Mr. President, cannot be based solely on what others do. It has to be based on what best practices are available for us to achieve our national ambitions. And our targets need to be above 60%, Mr. President. And we will ask over time as we build out this system to get formal declaration of this target in the way we have formal targets for protected areas. We need formal targets on how we manage our waste stream, but that will take some time. Mr. President, we will be working with all stakeholders, including the parliamentary opposition, as we develop policy, legislative and operational ways forward. Mr. President, through plastic bottles, though plastic bottles dominate the conversation, the current framework which governs the ban has gaps, and they have been identified. One such gap is related to the size of bags which are banned. A technical assessment is underway, which will determine the appropriate size increases and inform a legislative amendment this year. One thing that's not in the statement, and I apologize to colleagues because I think it was an oversight, it is in my draft in my phone, but I do need to put it on record. The government will also commence the process of consultation related to microplastics which are found in personal care products. Though not a huge economic driver, they have immense environmental impact. And we will look at those with a mind.
Minister, what they are doing now is because they have banned them in so many developed countries, they are dumping it here.
Quite so.
You can't get a
and we are no dumping ground.
Face wash now, right, Senator Lynn? You can't get a face wash now with those liquids in it that you advertise it as salt. It's not really salt, you know, it's plastic.
I'm aware,
right, Senator
President, and Jamaica will never be, rather, a dumping ground for anyone. I'm speaking on plastics, Mr. Bunting. The government is on record, colleagues, in its support for the resolutions passed recently at UNEA 5.2 in Kenya. These resolutions, colleagues, Mr. President, target plastic pollution and identify it actually as one of the triple planetary crises that we must work on. The resolution of particular interest to this morning's statement is a resolution which calls for the establishment of an INC, an international negotiating committee, to help develop a legally binding treaty. Jamaica puts on record, yet again, even though we voted for it, our support and our intent to work very closely with this INC. Jamaica will be an active participant, and once completed, will take the appropriate steps to sign the treaty and adhere to it. We're, however, not sitting by and waiting on international guidance to take action. Jamaica's environmental policy will target the issue of microplastics and recycling this year. Greater focus will be also placed on closing loopholes in the current legal framework which could be exploited. Mr. President, I wish to advise that the government has made financing available to NEPA to undertake specific activities to support the next steps related to plastic pollution management, including but not limited to develop a singular plastics policy for Jamaica, research and answer questions for exploring the alternatives to styrofoam. Now, this is a point of, and I digress, this is a point that has been a source of much debate. What has replaced styrofoam? Is it better? Is it worse? This wasn't the intention, etc. What has replaced it largely are actually PET containers. Making the point because we did mention it's the same PET that make bottles, so it's not as bad. And as I said, all plastics aren't created equally, and it is recyclable if sterilized. Still not where we want to be, colleagues. So we're going to look at it with a view to making the changes this year that push us closer in the direction that we're trying to get to. And if we do it and we need to go again in an iterative fashion, we'll go again. But we will close the loop and get us back to the paper-based boxes that right after the ban we did see flood the market, which is better for our environment. But we have some consultation and some work to do. Mr. President, research and recommend the modality to pioneer government plastic-free zones in ministries, departments, and agencies. Research the state of recycling in Jamaica and develop and implement public education programs surrounding all of the foregoing. Mr. President, a lot of work to do, but we have made the funding available to get it started. Some of it will take up to 18 months, but we have started. Mr. President, my penultimate point, I wish to also bring to the attention of the Honourable Senate that the Bureau of Standards has actually completed its work on the standards for biodegradability, and they have been gazetted, Mr. President. So every once in a while you see something that looks like plastic, and it says, no man, it's not plastic, it's biodegradable. Jamaica now has its standards gazetted where you can actually get those tested, and we'll be able to use that to formulate proper policy and to implement accordingly. Customs will be able to say, where is your certificate from Bureau of Standards? Because nobody else would know. It requires scientific clearance. And we now have the framework for that, and that is groundbreaking work, and I wish to put on record my congratulations for the Bureau of Standards team. I'll ask Senator Gale to carry my congratulations to many of his members in that space. Thank you. We are proud of that work, Mr. President. As I close, I wish to advise the country that the government would work with all stakeholders to ensure our transition to products which can be more sustainably consumed and can be entrance into the development of the circular economy, which will be done with the least pain to any segment of the society. However, sustainability and environmental protection must be paramount. I thank you.
Thank you, Minister. Senator Fraser-Binns.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, you mentioned earlier that whenever issues of the environment comes up, how the energy and the atmosphere is so far different. But, you know, I believe in large part that I believe that it has to do with the environment, but I also believe in large part, and I hope I don't get in a lot of trouble for this, but I believe in large part that it really has to do with the person who leads the portfolio in Minister Samuda. And I say that not just because of my own personal experience with him, but even before he became the Minister of the Environment, or Minister with responsibility for the environment, he has always sought to engage in this inclusiveness and consultation. And that is how I wanted to start.
I can't help but recall Shakespeare. We have come to do what the seas are not to praise him.
Not today, sir. But in 2016, when Minister Samuda led that motion, and I recall, without giving details, we had a discussion in the margins of this parliament. He made certain recommendations and gave certain assurances regarding how we could treat with the matter. And I didn't know Minister Samuda as I know him now, but I accepted his assurances, and I can say that those have really come to pass. And being the opposition's representative on the joint committee or the multi-stakeholder committee that looked at the ban on plastics, it really confirmed in my mind that this really is the approach that we need to take for Project Jamaica. As the opposition sitting on that committee, I can't say at any point that I did not know what was happening. There was no information that was kept from me, and I was engaged, and I was able to give the opposition's position. And it is because of that level of engagement, Mr. President, why the opposition really gave its full support to the ban on plastic bags, and we continue to give our support. We had a little tete-a-tete in terms of the implementation, but outside of that, the intent was fully supported by the government. And 3 years down the line, I believe that the objective, Senator Samuda, has been realized largely, and I say largely, not completely, because one of the things that I have seen is just a complete change of how we do things, especially at the supermarkets. In the early days of 2019, you'd still see people go with their and rely on the bags. You'll see people coming out with their food in their hands from the supermarket because they didn't remember. But fast forward 3 years later, what you're seeing is when I go to the supermarket, when I go to your supermarket, Senator Webby, almost everybody have their own recyclable bags. And it confirms in my mind not just the importance of across the aisle conversation and engagement, but the importance of public education in changing behavior. And I am I'm recommending to the government that as we continue the changes required in terms of the environment and other aspects of the society, that we do not cut funding on public education. Because public education, more than law, is what is going to be required to change behavior. I still see some bags. I still see them in places that I should not be seeing them. But what breaks my heart, even more than seeing them at places where I shouldn't be seeing them, is I see them on the streets. Yeah. You know, Mr. President, I did a tour of Bengal in St. Anne 2 months ago. And there are no bus stops. There are no seats. The nearest commercial enterprise is at least 20 minutes by drive from where we entered. But I could see all the garbage on the street side just blowing in the wind. The plastic bags, the black plastic bags, the lunch boxes. We still see a lot of that. And that breaks my heart. And it means, Minister Samuda, that notwithstanding the legislation and the compliance rate, that we have to do more in terms of public education and enforcement to get the full buy-in. But we're not going to make perfection the enemy of the good. We have made some good strides, and we celebrate those, accepting the work that has to be done. I want to turn to the issue of the plastic ban, the plastic bottles, because, and I can say that, you know, my task force and I, we've looked at it, not in great detail, but we've looked at it, we've discussed it, and we don't have a solution at this point, but it's a matter that we'll continue to look at, Minister. But what we do know is that the refund scheme isn't working as it should. I wondered whether, though it is still early days, whether you and your team have undertaken a study, even a marginal study, to ascertain the reasons for this. The reason for the slow take-up, is it that the payment, the refund, the payment is not, the compensation is not enough to act as an incentive, or is it that the areas are not accessible? And whereas I want to commend the Recycling Partners of Jamaica, and I have worked with them, and anytime I've called upon them, they have been there to assist us. And, you know, there's another entity that I'm associated with, and I know that they do work with Recycling Partners, and the Recycling Partners have actually helped them to develop hubs, and it has worked. A month ago, I was in Manchester, where we met with a group of children at a primary school, and we spoke about, it was Recycling Day, and we spoke about recycling, and Recycling Partners committed to giving us a skip so that they can dispose of their plastic bottles. And we commend them for their work, But notwithstanding that, there is certainly something missing. And I believe in the absence of the legislation, we can look to see what can we do to encourage and to ensure that this project is more effective. And as I talk about the school I visited, the undertaking we gave was that we're going to work with them to establish an environmental club. Minister, I would have mentioned to you in our meeting at some point, I believe I did, that the government has to find a way to give support to the establishment of environmental clubs, because this is where it starts. Natalie, like me, you grew up in the country, so you remember going to school and we used to sing bits of paper lying on the ground, and, you know, to this blessed day, that's a song that I can't forget. But not only did we sing it, but we action it. So every time you see a paper on the ground, you pick it up and you put it in the garbage. And I think we have to start with our children, because my age group really, we had tough. It's like, honestly, it's that sometimes we don't care, or perhaps we're just caught up with the economics of life, that it is not a priority to us. So we have to start with our children to change that mindset and to change the culture. And I think our environmental clubs in school is a good starting point. And I want to put in a plug, Minister, to see what support we can give for them. The other thing as well is we have to find a way to not just the use or the reuse of plastic bottles, but incentivize the reuse of it. I do recall a year or two ago, there's a gentleman, I think, in central Kingston, or was it south, but in Kingston, who was showcasing the work that he was doing using plastic bottles. He was building like fences and stuff. And I think that is something that we can encourage. I know we perhaps don't have enough that we can use it in the construction industry, but there can be other small projects that we can undertake. We can use them to build chairs at schools, you know, seats at schools, under the trees where children can sit and have a little discussion. Smaller projects we can do. But also, we need to encourage every individual to be a part of this new process and this new paradigm. Use a plastic bottle to do your gardening. Senator Longmore, you're a farmer. You understand how the thing set. Most of us live in Kingston and we don't have the big land space, but it doesn't prevent us from doing a little backyard gardening. So we can use plastic, you know, I was trying to recall the term, Minister Samuda, you can help me, that they use now. When you have farm, you can have a big tree in a small container, no, I can't recall the term now. That's it. Thank you, Mr. President, yes. And Mr. President, you're on a roll today, man, top of the class, QC. But seriously, it is something, Mr. President, that we need to encourage more of us to do, and you don't need land space for it. You can put it on your veranda at home, and it grows a full tree with mangoes and everything, with gungo. My little son came home from school yesterday with a regular cup. There's 7 ounces cup, plastic, transparent white cups, with a pea plant, right? And I told him we're going to keep it in there and we're going to watch it, we're going to water it, because come December I want gungo peas for my rice. But, you know, and I was very serious and he's very excited about it. But the truth is, these are some of the things we can do, each of us can do. Pardon? Listen, I sent him to school and paying school fee. But on a serious note, Mr. President, these are some of the things that we can do, and we need to encourage, and it does not cost. You buy your soda or you buy whatever you buy, instead of putting the garbage in instead of putting the bottle in the garbage, you just cut it, and you can use it and plant something in it. And finally, you know, Minister, I agree with you. I agree with you regarding the need for legislation. The fact is, if we are really serious about our own survival and our existence, some things are going to have to be encouraged, not just through persuasion, but through the power of legislation coupled with moral persuasion. And I think that there are instances where the law is going to be critical, and certainly this is one of them. And particularly because it is a law that is going to incentivize people. And, you know, everybody likes to feel that they're appreciated. Everybody likes some kind of incentive, and so we give our support to that. And in closing, as I take my seat, Mr. President, I want to say that, it doesn't matter how well the opposition and the government works, and it doesn't matter how much resources the private sector pumps into the environment. If every single one of us don't start to see it as our personal responsibility, then the work of all of us in here and in the private sector and the different stakeholders is really going to come to naught. So I am encouraging every single Jamaican to see this quest not just as the government's quest or the opposition quest or the private sector quest or the NGO quest, but to see it as their personal quest to protect, to manage garbage waste, and to ensure that they play their part, not just to enjoy the constitutional provision, but to ensure that we protect Jamaica so that our children and their children can have a Jamaica that have clean air, fresh water, and will continue to be the land of wood and water. And as Rubble says in Paw Patrol, we have got to renew, reuse, and recycle. Thank you, Mr. President. And Mr. President,
Thank you, Mr. President. But perhaps I thank colleague Senator on the other side. Perhaps if there are other questions, I can take them. No more? Sure. I too have had sufficient experience with Paw Patrol. But yes. The statement before, President, was, as I think, what seems to have been received as it was intended, which is an update on matters related to a particular action that we took, and I think we took with great consensus and collaboration. And it sought, quite frankly, Mr. President, to ensure that it gave an honest assessment that it has not been perfect, but we are moving in the right direction and we have had significant gains. The point made by Senator Fraser-Binns around the need for public education and I think reculturing and retraining our citizens is noted. It's easier when you get it right the first time and get it right at the educational level. And the point is well noted. I won't say too much on it today. Again, State of the Nation is coming up. But it is a point well noted and supported. President, the issue, and as I said in the statement, it's important to acknowledge the work of the recycling partners and indeed other recycling companies. They've done a good job. The capacity elements that they require will require intervention from government, which hasn't necessarily come yet, but it will also require commitment at a larger scale from the private sector players who benefit from this sale. So it will be all of us that will have to get involved. The government will have to look at public spaces and how it creates the space necessary to facilitate such collection. But private groups such as churches and community groups will also have to look at spaces that are suitable to facilitate the increase in collection points. Because the point made by colleague Senator is right. It is too difficult in many cases to find the spaces convenient enough for drop-offs. And that has been an issue, not just in Kingston and St. Andrew, but certainly nationally. And yes, I am seeing the increases in skips popping up, but we have to move further, faster, quickly. Yeah, there you go. The cubic feet by way of rolling stock is important. And not by that I simply mean the trucks. The benefit of plastic is the problem with it, right? It's light, rather it's thin, it's bulky, but generally light. So you're in essence trucking air, which is one of the issues that affect the economic viability of recycling globally, which is why the government has to work with the private sector so closely to build the capacity, because you're going to have to build mini baling stations that make sure that when trucks do come to pick up, they're not picking up air, right? Because a full truckload of plastic bottles is very expensive to pick up without a lot of weight really in it. So it's not necessarily the most efficient. So it's one of the things that we're going to have to look at. A model that I've seen actually in Singapore, Sir Dan, is manufacturers who actually distribute these plastic bottles at the end of the week, facilitate some of their trips back where the trucks would be empty anyway in bringing the space. Now, they only do it at the end of the week. That allows the time for the sterilization so that food health standards are met, but there are ways to do it. We're just going to have to work together nationally, across the aisle, certainly with all stakeholders in society, to find the best model. Now, anybody who's ever worked in logistics knows if you find a way to get 13% of your waste stream brought to the point of collection as opposed to garbage trucks having to go for it, it will allow the small fleet that we do have to go further and collect more, because less of the bulky space, which is air, will be taken up in the trucks. So it's a benefit to the rest of your solid waste collection as well. The core point, I think, coming away from the plastic bottle discussion is really that the circular economy is where we need to go. So whether it is building hydroponic systems, which can be very beneficial to agriculture and to horticultural pursuits, the key is how are we going to create economic value within the waste that we collect. And that is a discussion that has to come to an end, and we have to settle as a nation on exactly what we will do with this waste. The discussion on waste energy has raged for a long time. The discussion on turning these plastic bottles into roof tiles, into hydroponic systems, into statues, into an input even into asphalt. We've looked at all the solutions, but it's time to make a decision because the science is clear. There are many models. We'll just have to drop our volumes into the space. I know the enterprise team looking at our waste management system totally is progressing well and will come to cabinet soon, so we await that space. But this can't be an unending discussion. But the first key is to make sure that we're actually able to separate and collect this plastic waste so that it doesn't enter our waste stream in the same in the way that it traditionally has, and certainly doesn't go into our marine environment. I'm very happy at the support generally for the progress being made in the plastic ban, and I think with that, President, I will close my statement. Thank you.
Yeah, yes. Thank you very much, Minister. I agree with you, and I recall the initial resistance to the plastic ban. People were quarreling in the supermarket, and I myself had said that it was going to be a difficult ask, but at the same time, I think people have taken on to it. And I think that the community, the country, you know, we always chastise people, and Jamaican people, and say that we are by nature quarrelsome. But we need to indicate our appreciation to the citizenry at large who have accepted the ban on plastic and have sought alternatives. As one of my colleagues pointed out, you're rarely going to a supermarket now and see people coming out with the things in their hand, or if they do, it's one or two items. And I'm sure that there has been some positive economic spin-off because a number of the bags that we are using now are locally manufactured. I had said, Minister Samuda, when you were responsible for the prisons, that I think that it is something that could have been done in the prisons, but nobody took me up on that one. But there you go. So I think that the people of Jamaica should be thanked and congratulated on their effort to get rid of the use of single-use plastic bags. We just need to just push on, and there are sufficient examples to follow. Kenya, for example, a number of the African countries have really moved on this matter of banning single-use plastics because they recognize that if they don't, it will jeopardize their future as a destination for visitors and indeed as a safe and healthy place for their own citizens to live. Announcements.
Laid on the table of the Senate today are the following: Government of Jamaica financial statements of the Consolidated Fund for the year ended March 31, 2022. Annual report on audited financial statements of the Airports Authority of Jamaica for the financial year 2017, 2018, 2018, 2019, and 2019, 2020. The Hire Purchase Amendment Regulations 2022 under the Hire Purchase Act. Special report of the Office of the National Rapporteur's Knowledge, Attitudes, and Practices Study on Trafficking in Persons in Jamaica. The Tourism Enhancement Fund Business Continuity Plan Guidebook. Revised framework of the Disaster Risk Management Plan Template and Guidelines for a Resilient Tourist Sector, dated May 2022. Revised framework for disaster risk management in Jamaica's tourism sector. Annual report of the Milk River Hotel and Mineral Spa for the year 2020-2021. The Integrity Commission Special Investigation Report concerning allegations of favoritism, conflict of interest, impropriety, and irregularity in the award of a contract by the National Works Agent under the East Portland Special Mitigation Program 2017. Ministry Paper number 39 of 2022, and Annual Report of the Agro Investment Corporation for the year 2018-2019. Ministry Papers 40 to 46 of 2022 on the special intervention under the Law Reform Zones of Special Operations, Special Security and Community Development Act for the following communities: Denham Town Community, Norwood Community, Mount Salem Community, Parade Gardens Community, Savannah Lamar Community, Greenwich Town Community, and August Town Community. Social intervention, June 10, 2022. And the Law Reforms Zones of Special Operations, Special Security, and Community Development Measures Extension of Period of Operation, number 3 orders 2022, and resolutions for the following: the Norwood Community in the Parish of St. James Zone, the Greenwich Town Zone, the Denham Town Community Zone, the Mount Salem Community and environs in the Parish of St. James Zone, the Savannah Lamar Zone, the August Town Zone, and the Parade Gardens Zone.
Thank you, Madam Clerk. Bills brought from the Honourable House of Representatives.
The following is a message from the Speaker of the House of Representatives. To the Honourable Senate, I have the honour to advise the Honourable Senate that on the 7th day of June 2022, a bill entitled An Act to Provide for the Transfer of Assets of the Jamaica Development Bank to the Development Bank of Jamaica Limited, and to repeal the Jamaica Development Bank Act and for connected matters, was passed in the House of Representatives. Signed, Marissa Dalrymple Philibert, CD MP, Speaker of the House of Representatives.
Mr. President, I signify my willingness to take charge of the bill.
A bill shortly entitled the Jamaica Development Bank Repeal Act 2022, read a first time.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice of a second reading of the bill.
Thank you, Minister. Petitions, papers, reports from committees, notices of motions given orally.
Mr. President, I beg to give notice that at the next meeting of the Senate, I will move the following motion. Be it resolved that the Hire Purchase Amendment Regulations 2022 under the Hire Purchase Act, which were laid on the table of the Senate on the 17th day of June 2022, be referred to the Regulations Committee of the Senate for consideration and report. Mr. President, I further beg to give notice that at a stage late At a later stage today, I will move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take this motion.
Thank you, Minister. Questions and answers to questions? Motions that may be made at the commencement of public business requiring notice. Motions relating to the sitting of the Senate. Motions for leave to introduce bills. The presentation of bills without the leave of the Senate first obtained. Public business.
Mr. President, unless colleagues would like to take the bills taken earlier.
Senator Campbell.
Sure.
Thank you, Mr. President. Mr. President, I now move for the suspension of the standing orders to enable me to take the motion, notice of which I gave earlier.
Members would have heard the question. Those in favour? Against?
I now ask that the regulations be referred to the Regulations Committee for consideration and report.
Just highlight the regulation. Just read the title for me, please.
The hire purchase. I'm sorry. The hire purchase amendment regulations 2022.
Members would have heard the question. Those in favour? Against? So ordered. Minister.
Thank you, President. I was rudely interrupting colleague Senator Campbell, but I was saying that unless members are so minded to take the DBJ bill tabled earlier, it is not contemplated to do any further business today. I therefore ask that the Senate be adjourned for a date to be fixed.
Yes, Minister? But he's not making himself clear.
Mr. President, it is not intended or contemplated for us to do any further business today. I therefore ask that the Senate be adjourned.
The question is that the Senate be adjourned for a date to be fixed. Those in favour? Against? So ordered. Thank you very much, members. And just before you go, Happy Father's Day on Sunday to all the fathers and to the mothers who have fathered them.